State Director of AARP Washington, and I want to welcome you to this important discussion on voting in the upcoming August 2nd primary election. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization, as you may know, and we've been working to promote the health and well-being of Americans 50 plus for over 60 years now. AARP Washington is working to ensure all Washingtonians get the information they need to understand recent changes in election law and how it might impact them. If you have questions about voting from home, voting early, or voting in person for the August 2nd primary election, you're in the right place and on the right call. Joining us today for this important discussion is our special guest, Steve Hobbs, the Washington Secretary of State. Secretary Hobbs will discuss voter misinformation, how the voting process works, deadlines for the upcoming primary election, and answer your questions to make sure you have the information you need to exercise your right to vote. Following our conversation with Secretary Hobbs, we will then talk with Jevin West, a professor at the Information School at the University of Washington and co-founder of the Center for an Informed Public. Jevin will help us dig a little deeper into election misinformation and how to spot it. Now, if you've participated in one of our Teletown Halls in the past, you know this is similar to a radio talk show, and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions live of our guests. If you'd like to ask a question about the election, all you have to do is press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with an AARP staff member who will note your name and question and place you in the queue to ask that question live. The sooner you press *3, the sooner you'll be back online and able to ask questions directly of our guests. And keep a pen and paper handy, as we'll be sharing some really helpful information today, phone numbers and websites that you may want to jot down. For those of us who are just joining, my name is Doug Shadell, State Director of AARP Washington. I want to welcome you to this important discussion on voting in the upcoming August 2nd primary election. We're here today with Steve Hobbs, the Washington Secretary of State, and Jevin West from the University of Washington, and we're taking your questions live. AARP is bringing you this Teletown Hall to give voters up-to-date details about the voting process to help you and your family keep informed on what you need to do to vote in the upcoming August 2nd primary election. For more information, you can visit our website at aarp.org/WA-votes. aarp.org/WA-votes. AARP Washington is very fortunate today to have Secretary of State Steve Hobbs with us. Mr. Hobbs was recently appointed Secretary of State by Governor Jay Inslee to fill the vacancy left by Kim Wyman. Previously, he served as the member of the Washington State Senate representing the 44th District from 2007 until 2021. Secretary Hobbs, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on the call.
Great. Well, I'll get us started with just a few questions, and then we'll see what callers might want to ask about this August 2nd primary. You know, it's no surprise that over the last several years, misinformation around voting has become more and more prevalent. How might this, from your perspective, impact voters participating in our call today?
Well, certainly, and obviously, probably some of your listeners, tracking what's happening with the January 6th committee hearings, just sad with all this misinformation, disinformation that's going about. And, here in Washington State, in October to November of 2020, we reported to the Center of Internet Security more than 180 separate instances of election disinformation that was posted online.
Oh, really?
And it's just critical. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just said, oh, really? I didn't realize that. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes. It was 180 instances of disinformation. 180.
Wow.
Yeah, 180. And what impacts on the voters who are participating in the call today is, if these election lies and misinformation, disinformation, if it just starts growing without countering it or without knowing what really happens with our elections, it creates doubt in our election process. The very foundation of democracy is our elections. And so what I encourage your listeners to do is, whenever they see it, a tweet or a Facebook post. Most people, my age and older, I'm 52 and older, usually use Facebook. Just take a pause, look at the Facebook post, and don't just reshare it or retweet a tweet. Look at the person. Like, is this a real person? Do you even know this person? Some of these are bots. Some of these are fake people. We have malign actors outside the United States, entire intelligence agencies out there tied to nation states who create these fake posts to create disruption with our American public and have us hate one another. We don't want that. And so really, it's just to take a pause, take a minute, and see if that tweet or that post is even real, right? Is it being reported on the mainstream news? And if it isn't, maybe you should just wait till it comes up.
Well, Steve, can you give an example from those 180 that would affect voters? Like, when you say misinformation, everybody's aware of the kind of the Russian thing and all, the disinformation.
Sure.
What are some examples you can think of? And if you don't have any, that's fine. We might ask Jevin that same question later. But can you think of some that would be just like, particularly disruptive?
Well, let me give you one, maybe more of a scarier one that, though this was kind of before kind of the rise of disinformation used as a weapon against our elections. But a couple of years ago, a county auditor was just trying to do a right thing and pick up an extra ballot drop box. And I'm sure you and others have seen these drop boxes around the community where you can drop off your ballot. Well, this county auditor simply wanted an extra one because he didn't have enough. So he called another county auditor and asked to borrow one. And so these county auditors, a lot of times they have very small staff, maybe 2 or 3 people in some of these rural counties. So he got into his personal pickup truck, drove to the other county, picked up the drop box, put it in his pickup truck, drove back, got hungry, went to the Capitol Mall there in Olympia, grabbed himself a burger, but guess what? Guess what was on his pickup truck, right? It was a drop box. So some people took a picture of it, and then next thing you know, some people say, "Yeah, see where this is going? Oh, is he stealing a ballot drop box?" And luckily it didn't go anywhere because it was a couple of years ago. But can you imagine now if it happened now? And you have people out there who will grab onto that. You have nation states with their intelligence agencies grab that picture, quickly create a fake website. And then next thing you know, people think that somebody's stealing a bunch of ballots.
Yeah.
And all this person was doing is just delivering a drop box to his own county.
That's a great example. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. My name is Doug Shadell, and I'm the State Director of AARP Washington. And this is a live Teletown Hall about the upcoming August 2nd primary. And if you would like to ask Secretary of State Hobbs a question, all you have to do is press *3 on your telephone keypad. We've already got over 5,000 people on this call, Steve, so this is obviously a very hot topic. Let's talk about voting by mail. Washington is incredibly fortunate to have a mail-in ballot state. Can you just walk us through some tips on or suggestions on how to ensure that mail-in ballots get filled out correctly and submitted correctly?
Oh yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. We're a mail-in ballot state, which is great. We've been doing it for 20 years. The convenience of being able to vote, sometimes, at the minimum 18 days before the election. Some of you have already received your ballots, and you'll have the ability to do that at home, or drop it off at the numerous drop boxes. And by the way, you can contact your county auditor to find out where those drop boxes are at. And by the way, the last election. The 2020 election, 73% of the people used drop boxes instead of dropping it in the mail. You don't need a stamp, so you don't need to throw a stamp in there, though sometimes people do that. You don't have to do that. You can just put it in your mailbox or at a drop box. The important thing, Doug, is to sign your ballot. We do have ballot rejections, and ballot rejections usually happen when people fail to sign their ballot, or maybe the signatures don't match. sometimes. We just had a study done by the state auditor that showed us that blacks are 4 times to have their ballots rejected, Latinos 3 times as much, and Asians twice as much. And though probably none of these people are listening, but young males, like my sons, their ballots are rejected because of signatures not matching. And I think it has a lot to do with the lack of cursive being taught in their schools, which you don't. If you see your young kid or your grandparent, or not grandparent, grandkid signing their ballot, just tell them to print their name. It's okay if they don't know cursive, but it has to be consistent because we match it with your driver's license signature. But the number one thing is to sign your ballot. So just drop it in the mail or Dropbox.
It'd get rejected if there was just nothing on that signature line. But if you don't know cursive, you could just do it in block letters, as long as it's signed by you, and that is the same way you sign all the time. Then it's fine. Is
Absolutely. Right? Yes, you just got to be consistent. Yes, signature. Tell your kid or grandkid that they don't, you don't have to do it in cursive. You just have to put a consistent signature. So you can just print your name, and that's fine. And what we're going to do soon, I hope, in this election is we'll be notifying voters via text message. I hope that comes online here at the next election. I think it will. And then that way, if you accidentally did not sign your ballot, you'll probably get a text message saying, hey, your ballot was rejected. You'll have to come in and sign the affidavit to have your ballot count, or come in and update your signature.
I thought that was interesting that you said 73% of the people vote by delivering it to a Dropbox, even though you could just mail it. Any speculation about why people prefer Dropboxes? I'm just curious more than anything.
Doug, that surprised me too. I mean, I was looking at the numbers. I'd look at it again, and there had been a significant increase of people using Dropboxes. Now, there are theories out there, and the two of them. One is people like doing the communal thing. I do it. Like, I could just walk out to my mailbox and drop the ballots in there, but I don't do that. It just occurred to me, I actually take it downtown, not very far. I grab a cup of coffee, grab a donut from the donut shop, and see my buddies and drop it in the mailbox. I guess it's a communal event, people like that. The other reason is people did not trust the U.S. Postal Service. Some people didn't at the time. You might remember the controversy that was coming up in the 2020 election regarding the U.S. Postal Service. And the other thing is just, it's more direct. Some people feel like, hey, my ballot's more secure because I'm putting it here and it's going to go directly to my county auditor versus putting it in the mailbox. It's going to go through a distribution center and then here and there, and then it'll get to the county auditor.
Right. That's probably right. That's what I was thinking too. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Secretary Hobbs, who is the Secretary of State, and we're talking about voting. And if you'd like to ask a question, press *3 on your keypad, and you will be in the queue to ask the Secretary of State. I mean, they don't get a better authority on voting than the Washington State Secretary of State. Steve, another question that's come up is, so some people still like to vote in person. Like, sometimes I sort of miss that myself. Can everyone vote in person, or does it depend on where you live, or how does that work?
No, everyone can vote in person. All you got to do is, there's 2 ways to do it. One, like I had mentioned, do it in your Dropbox. Usually they're located in very convenient places. Make it a communal event with your buddies. Go down and get a cup of coffee, go grab a donut, go drop your ballots in the Dropbox. The other thing you could do is just go to your county auditor and do it that way. And then some counties have other voting centers that you can go to, but most of the time in your counties you just go to the county auditor's office and you can vote there. Also, some of the schools, our 4-year institutions, will have voting centers there.
We're starting to get quite a few calls in, so I'm going to go to the phones in a minute, but walk us just through quickly the deadlines for voting and registering. And I don't know if you have that in front of you or not, but what are the deadlines? Because we're coming up, aren't we?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I'll go through some of the dates. June 17th, which is already passed, military and overseas ballots were mailed. I remember when I was a service member and I received my ballot a lot earlier. July 15th, ballots are mailed to everyone. Some of you have received your ballots because some auditors have done it a little earlier. July 25th, last day to register the vote online and by mail. This allows us to process your registration and mail it to you before election date. And August 2nd, primary election day, last day to register in person. You got to go to the county auditor. Last day to mail ballots, last day to put it in the drop box. And remember, you got to do it before 8 p.m. on that Tuesday.
Okay, so those are pretty solid. And, well, let's see if we can't go to the phones and get some live callers. There's a lot of interest in this. Let's go to Warren in Kent. Warren, you have a question?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you can switch parties. If you're registered in one party but you decide that you don't like that party anymore, can you still switch and vote in a primary?
Yes, that is a good question. So in this state, we don't register our party affiliations. There's many states that do that, but the great thing about Washington State, you don't have to do it. So you can actually, in this primary election, you can vote for a Republican in one position and a Democrat in another position. So that's the great thing about this state. You are free to vote how you I should say you can vote for the candidate that you like. There you go, regardless of party. The only time it comes into play is the presidential primary, and of course that only happens once every 4 years.
Okay, that's a good answer. I didn't realize it. Could be that gentleman was from a different state where you have to register as a Democrat or a Republican.
I do get that question quite a bit, especially from folks that have come from states where they register their party affiliation.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's see. Let's go to another phone call. Debbie from Belfair. Are there, Debbie?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah, go.
My question was, what checks and balances are in place for someone to not vote? I have a friend that his wife is deceased, and she got a ballot in the mail. So how is that checked so people that are deceased, their ballots aren't counted?
Yes.
If someone would, fill it out.
Yes, no, absolutely. So what ends up happening is there's a system called ERIC, which is a multi-state system. We are at Washington State as part of it. And when somebody dies, the death certificate, the notification is sent to ERIC, and so the state will know about it. And this is done every so often to update our files, and we will know about it because we have actually had instances where it's usually a spouse who votes for their dead partner, and they're not supposed to do that, and we do talk to them and tell them that they shouldn't have done it. Now, if you vote and then pass away, your ballot still counts because you were alive when you made the vote. So we do catch these things, and we have done it before. So yes, that's what happens when somebody dies.
Okay, great. Let's see. Let's go to Kathleen in Richland.
Yes, my question is that I like to put my ballot into the drop box itself. How do I know that all those are getting counted so that we know how many are in that box? And I'm not sure where they go, but I don't distrust anyone, but I'm just curious. Where do they go, and do they get counted when they get there to follow up on that?
Absolutely. Thank you. That was that's a great question. So when you drop your ballot in the drop box, it does get counted. So when it gets picked up and goes to the county auditor, they count your ballot. The first thing they'll do is, they're not going to look at your vote until after 8 p.m. on Tuesday. They won't know how you voted, but they will know that you submitted your ballot. So what you would do to check it out is you could either go online at votewall.gov, or you can contact your county auditor. Your local county auditor will know, and they'll let you know if your ballot has been received or not. The other thing you could do is, if you are at a loss, and I will give you the 1-800 number where our elections division can answer your questions, or at least direct you to the right person, like your county auditor, is 1-800-448-4881. So that's 1-800-448-4881.
And I thank you. And I take it that's a number that people could ask any number of questions about voting, right? Sort of a all purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I think it's time for a poll question. What do you think? Now, this is very easy to vote on your phones. We want to ask you how you intend to vote. We've been talking with Secretary of State Hobbs about all the different ways you can vote and people's preferences and whatnot. And we'd like to know how you plan to vote in the upcoming August 2nd primary election. So your choices will be, am I going to vote by mail? Am I going to do early voting at an in-person location? Or do you plan to vote in person at your polling location on election day? Now, to vote, press 1 if you're going to vote by mail, okay, on your keypad. Press 2 if you're going to use early voting at an in-person, and press 3 on your telephone keypad if you plan to vote in person on election day. I'm going to say that again. Press 1 if you vote by mail. Press 2 for early voting at an in-person location. That?
That's actually 2 is Dropbox, 3 is in person.
Well, I can't change it now. Okay. Vote 1 for voting by mail, press 2 for early voting in person, and press 3 for polling on election day. And we'll wait those results. And while we're waiting for those results, I'd like to bring Jevin West into the conversation. We just heard Jevin is a professor at the Information School at the University of Washington, and he is the co-founder of the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington. Maybe we can get him to tell a little about that. And Professor West, as a nationally recognized expert on how to spot misinformation, he's appeared with myself and others at AARP Washington over the last couple of years on this topic. It's a very hot topic. Jevin, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for all that you're doing at AARP, and thank you, Steve, for all the work you're doing in your office in trying to, and not just trying, but making our elections safe and sound.
Maybe you could just talk a little bit what you're doing over there with that, in that regard, with making the election safer and how people can spot misinformation.
Sure. What we have a center at the University of Washington. It's a nonpartisan center where we have researchers and policymakers and educators and community organization leaders help us track misinformation at very large scales, at the scales of millions of tweets and Facebook posts and other kind of social media platforms, and at the individual level too. So we look not only at the level of millions of social media posts around a particular topic, and in this case it would be elections, but we look at it at individual level as well. And we do that through coordinated collaborations across the journalistic landscape, research landscape, etc. But we do have a project specifically around elections, and this is being run by one of my colleagues, Kate Starbird and Mike Caulfield, in our center. It's called our Rapid Response Project, and under that name, it's called the Election Integrity Partnership, and this is in collaboration with Stanford University, where during major elections, so in the next major election here in 2022, in November, we will be tracking a lot of the information about the election. So we won't be doing anything in the election itself. That's Steve's job and the 10,000 other state and local election offices around the country doing this amazing task that we have done during our major elections. We will be monitoring the information, and when we see things that are misleading or false, we try to get those out as quickly as possible to government agency or federal agencies, state agencies, journalists, community leaders, and let them know. And this could come from the left, it could come from the right. We'll let fact checkers know. We're doing a lot of that observation so that we can help these other leaders in this space try to get this kind of the good information out there.
Jevin, what I'm always asking you this, but can you think of some examples that people should be watching out for? We had Secretary of State give us the one example of, counties innocently moving drop boxes or borrowing drop boxes from a neighboring county. But are there other things that you come to mind when you know what Kate Sarver is working on in terms of the misinformation that you think might still be out there?
Absolutely. I mean, I have infinite examples. We have to be talking for about 5 hours, but we only have an hour, or not even an hour. But I'll talk about one of the major ones that we suspect we'll see a lot of, and that we're currently seeing right now, and that we saw pretty significantly during the last major election in 2020. And we actually saw it in 2016 as well. But one of the main narratives that will certainly rise is this idea of ballot trafficking, quote unquote, ballot trafficking. And that implies, as you can imagine with the word trafficking, because it's similar to human trafficking and other forms of illegal activity. But the ballot trafficking itself is actually a term that's used by the actual federal agencies. It's also termed ballot collection. And in many states, just to be very clear, in many states, it's absolutely okay to have someone else actually deliver your ballot. And so what happens a lot of times, and sometimes it's honest sort of concern by a citizen seeing someone else drop a ballot or multiple ballots off at a place that we drop our ballots at, and it could be a family member, and actually it's fully okay. And actually, if you're interested, you can go to what's called Ballotpedia. It's just spelled as it is, ballot and then pedia.org, and you can see what the rules are in all the different states around the United States. Turns out that 25 of the states, you're permitted actually you can choose someone to sort of deliver your ballot. There's 11 states that specify who may return ballots. Those could be members of families, caregivers. One state, I think it's Alabama, doesn't allow, only allows the voter to return the ballot, and then 13 don't specify. And I think Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Washington specifies who may return ballots. But the point here is that there are different rules across the United States, and this is why it can be confusing. It's also why it's used in sort of more nefarious ways by some individuals. Most of the people, I think, are just concerned. They'll see, there's people that they're even calling it, they have a new term for it now, ballot mules. There's likely going to be a documentary coming out on this, and I can tell you right now that there's all sorts of problems given the issues around the misuse of this term ballot trafficking. But I guess the main thing I would be on the lookout for is the overuse of this narrative called ballot trafficking that'll be used a lot. We talk about it in depth in a post that we put at our center that's available. I can share the link somehow. I can't do it on the phone, but it's a post where we explain how this narrative is misused and how it's been used in the past. So I would say that's probably the best example. And then there's all sorts of very specific examples of people taking a video or a picture or posting on Facebook or Twitter or other social media platforms. Look, this is all this illegal activity. There's someone that's dropping this ballot off that's not them, or multiple ballots. But again, that's allowed if it's individuals that are given that right by the voter themselves.
So let me see if I understand this. The ballot trafficking term, the way it would be misused is somebody would take a picture of somebody, walking their elderly father's ballot in or something like that. It's not their ballot. And they would imply that that's sort of like padding the ballot box somehow. Some kind of nefarious. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. And the term that the more sort of the normal term that's used is ballot harvesting, which even that's been sort of misused, or ballot collection. These are laws that are stated by the state, and they're allowed. But that's exactly how these things can turn into a rumor that then sort of go viral and say, look, this individual, was pushing this putting this ballot, which was they were ballot trafficking, when in fact the vote itself was fine, and then this person was likely following the rules. Now there could be some examples of that, but most of the examples that we see are either wrong or false or just misleading. But you described it correctly, Doug.
Got it. If you're just joining us, that was Jevin West. He's a professor at the Information School at the University of Washington, and a co-founder of the Center for an Informed Public. And we are talking about the August 2nd primary, with Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. The results of the poll are in. 85% of you said you plan to vote by mail, 10% drop box, 5% in person. So voting by mail seems to be the most popular choice, and that's certainly the way I do it. Well, let's see if we can go to the phones again. Marilyn from Aberdeen, do you have a question for either? And this is, by the way, press *3 if you have a question for either one of our guests now. We still have time for a couple more questions. Marilyn, go ahead. Aberdeen.
Okay. I was wondering how you decide what is misinformation when each party seems to think the other's given disinformation all the time, and why they can't just have one of the officials state what the law states, so that everybody understands it at the same time. And I was wondering why they think it's difficult for blacks and Latinos to register. I've heard that too.
Steve, you want to take that or start with and maybe Jeff?
I'll take maybe the first one. And actually, Steve, why don't you go first?
Sure. So what we're trying to do, we put a lot of money this last legislative session to reach out to communities to get them registered to vote. Obviously, if they're eligible, we are going to mirror what we see in King County, which is the Trusted Messenger program. So basically, we hire people who are from that community. A lot of new Americans that naturalize here and come from different countries. They're sometimes distrustful of government, and so we try to actively go out there and reach out to those communities. And then in terms of misinformation, disinformation, of course, we have an expert at the University of Washington. I'll talk a little bit about that, but I will tell you when we're developing our program, and I'd love to team up with you, by the way, on this, but one thing number one is to figure out if this person is real. Some of these are bots. Some of these are just fake posts. And so we are going to team up with the social media platforms. If we see something that is not even a real person, we will try to work with the various social media companies. We're also in constant contact with Homeland Security and CISA, which is Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, to screen all these. So. And I'll take it away. I don't want to take up all the air, so go ahead. Go ahead.
No, absolutely, Stephen. We would be absolutely all for helping and providing information that we find on this. And you're absolutely right that in many cases, these are not even real individuals. And even those that might even be real individuals, they're impersonating someone else. These are called these are not genuine accounts of people that they're proposing to be. And our group and other groups that do research on this have shown that with many examples in the past where they could be, for example, and it's not just Russia, but for example, there have been Russia agents that pretend to be multiple people online, and they can gain quite a bit of influence, and they can sow all sorts of confusion and doubt. And it's not even that they only choose one side. A lot of times they're choosing multiple sides just to sow confusion and doubt into the process of the election and the election results. And so this question is a good one, too, about how do we define misinformation? I'll tell you this. It's not so straightforward. There are straightforward things that can be falsified. So these are going to be things that are, let's say, state laws that are allowed or not allowed. So using the example I used before around ballot collection, it might be that someone's a politician claims from one side of the political aisle that, hey, this person's taking a ballot that's not even theirs and putting it in the ballot box. Well, there are ballot collection laws in some states that allow these kinds of things. And so you can sort of refute that quite easily. But if you talk to any fact checker, it turns out it's quite difficult. A lot of times the truth is somewhere in the middle. There's some aspects that are truthful and there's some parts that are false. But for us, what we end up trying to spend a lot of our time are things that are truly falsifiable, that are truly things that we can point to a source, point to a law, point to a video that, for example, didn't even exist in this time period. I'll give you an example. One thing that we do is also track misinformation during crisis events. So one thing that we see in almost all major hurricanes, for example, is a shark swimming through the streets of that city. Well, it's usually the same shark picture that you see in almost every single one of those hurricanes. And a lot of times people are just trolling, and sometimes people really believe they saw that. But we can then pull that image and go, see, this image was pulled from, Hurricane Katrina 8 years ago. And that one was then pulled from a previous event. It's one of these kind of tropes. We call them tropes that seem to pop up time and time again. And so that's what we can do. We can look at things that we know are false, make them available to the public so they can see how we came to that conclusion. But it is, I just got to concede when you're living in the misinformation space, especially the misinformation space that's politically charged, it's always challenging, especially when you're looking for intentional misleading. So we call that disinformation, when it's intentionally misleading people.
That's very interesting. Steve, just to follow up on the trafficking business, because Jevin had said there are some states that affirmatively permit that. What is Washington's position on that? Can I take my elderly ballot to the ballot box for her? I mean, I guess that's one.
You can take your family members' ballots to. Yeah, you can definitely do that.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And also just one quick thing, Doug, just because I want to be careful because we're trying to be careful with what language. So it's being termed ballot trafficking, or people are called ballot mules. The more technical proper term, I think, is ballot collection, or also just using ballot collection is probably the best term to use. But Oh, sorry. I hit mute accidentally. I'm so sorry. I meant to say the more proper term is ballot collection. And so that's the term that we encourage people to use just to get more Google information out there.
Yeah. Well,
you can't just collect your neighbor's ballot and drop it off. But you can do your elderly mom, and that's acceptable.
Yeah. Well, I always wondered who would enforce that, though, if I go to my downtown Burien drop-off box. I mean, there's nobody there,
Well, yeah, that's true. But then that's the same thing as, hey, there's nobody on this road. I don't see a cop. I'll just go ahead and speed. So, that's right. You're taking a risk. That's if you want to break the law. That's on you, right?
I'm not saying that.
Well, and let me give you another example, just to sort of drive that point home. If, for example, you got into a taxi cab that wasn't registered by the city, and you're the individual, and it might be that person's not, following the rules of taxi cabs, but it doesn't mean that you're let's say in this case, the vote, you're not illegal. The act itself might be by the taxi cab driver, but you're not. It still doesn't make the vote necessarily illegal itself. Most of the time, the vote itself is just fine. The process by which it was delivered doesn't change the vote. It's like if that third party then manipulated the votes, that would be an issue. But again, that's very rare, and that's what's being overplayed, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. We still have some more questions. Do we have time for more questions? Okay. You guys still up for? Can you hang around a little bit more?
I absolutely could. This is really important.
Okay.
Sure.
Really appreciate it, both of you, and your time here. And if you'd like to chime in, press *3 on your keypad, and we'll take your question. Curtis, Lacey.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. My question has to do with the motor voter legislation. So everybody that gets a driver's license in Washington is automatically registered to vote. Well, that's cool. But also everybody that wants a driver's license in Washington can get one regardless of their status, including undocumented immigrants. So when that happens, how do you make sure that the voter is actually a citizen?
Absolutely. That's a good question. So what happens is is they have to attest, right? So you have to sign saying that you are an eligible voter. So that's what happens, and the person at the clerk is supposed to ask you that. Now, if an undocumented person votes, they are breaking the law, and if they break the law, they will have authorities, law enforcement, come after them. And so, and by the way, they're asked this again when you sign your ballot. You're attesting that you are eligible to vote. So it's like twice. So again, it's kind of like when I had mentioned, if you look down the street and there's no cop, you can just go speed. Well, you could, but you're also still breaking the law and you're taking a chance. And I know there's a lot of misinformation regarding, all these undocumented people vote. But the problem with that argument is they're going to get caught. And the other thing is they're going to risk their chance at citizenship. So that is something that, my mom, who came to this country, who knew no English, she naturalized and became one. She would never have risked the chance at her citizenship by voting when she was not eligible, when she was not naturalized.
And also, just to add on to that, that's a really good example, Stephen. One thing that we talk to the public about when it comes to illegal voting, or even just sort of this harvesting idea that I had mentioned, is that the payoff is pretty minimal for what you get, but the penalty is quite high. There are strong laws against this. And so if a person was going to put one or two votes, that would have very little effect on the overall vote, but the risk is very high. So payoff, in this case, very low, risk very high. So it doesn't mean it doesn't ever happen and can't happen, but it certainly would change the way people would view it. It's not something that doesn't come with this high risk.
We still have some more questions. You're listening to a Teletown Hall with AARP and Secretary of State Steve Hobbs and Jevin West, Professor West from the University of Washington Information School. And Steve, I thought maybe we should go over those dates one more time. And you also have a website I think you wanted to mention of how people can get more information. Do you want to go over that time?
Certainly. It's votewa.gov. That's the website. You can also just go to the secretary. You can Google Washington State Secretary of State. Okay. You can also Google your the name of your county and an auditor. So, like I'm in Snohomish County, so Snohomish County Auditor, and you can get elections information that way. That's the best way of doing it. Get it from the source.
Yep. And you had told us early that ballots are going to be mailed to voters on July 15th, so be looking for that. First day of early in-person voting, July 15th. July 20. I hope I get these dates right. July 25th.
Yes, you are. Yep.
Is that right?
Yes, that's July 25th is the last day to register to vote online and by mail.
Right. Okay. And then August 2nd.
And then, of course, yes, August 2nd, then... that's the very last day before 8 p.m. And then if you haven't registered at all, you're going to have to go to your county auditor and do that in person.
Yeah. Well, as we start to wrap up here, Steve, what, if any, what keeps you up at night on this whole question of this? I guess I'd like to ask both of you this question, of all the things we've been talking about, what keeps you up at night the most in terms of the upcoming election and misinformation?
Well, I tell you, so, I served overseas, both in Kosovo and Iraq, and one of the things I did was election security. I did it for the first election in Kosovo, and I did it in the beginning stages of the first election in Iraq, and I never thought I would have to worry about elections in my own country and have to worry about it being so bad that people are storming the Capitol. So it's serious. That keeps me up at night. This misinformation, disinformation that might spread even more than it has before. But I think finally people are starting to understand. We are going to try to do a better job of informing the public about their vote, where the ballot goes, the security of your ballot. And of course, the constant threat of cyber attack from overseas actors against us and people within our own country as well. And then it's just so sad that our own people are taking these false narratives that sometimes come from outside the United States, and they just spin them out of control. And then next thing you know, people start believing it. So we just got to do a better job of informing the public. Your listeners have started by listening to this show. Good for you. This is a great start. And you know what? If any of your neighbors have any questions, get it from the source. They can contact their auditor. And a lot of times, some of these rural counties, the auditor will actually talk to you and tell you about your ballot in elections.
Yeah. And that local angle makes it harder for systemic fraud, doesn't it? The fact that there's each individual auditor in the counties are managing these things, right?
It sure does. I mean, we have a decentralized system, so it's 39 different counties. So if we have a problem in one county, it's not all, it's not all of it. So yes, that is good, and it's cost effective to have it done at the local level.
Yeah. Well, Jevin, I remember distinctly when you and I were doing this tour of the state on the sorting fact from fiction circuit, I guess we could call it, that you had this image of I think it was a mailbox with chains around it as misinformation about how they were locking up mailboxes all over the place so you couldn't vote. What keeps you up at night now, fast forward 2 years later, in terms of what you think the biggest threats are, misinformation-wise, around the election?
Well, what concerns me the most, and literally keeps me up at night, is that we, as a society, lose trust in this critical element of our democracy, this trust in elections, because of misinformation that comes out either outside our country or within our country, even from sort of honest sense-making that goes on that just sort of gets warped by our social media environments, by, a select few influencers out there. And so our goal is to do our best in making sure that people are aware of how those rumors spread and what those rumors are. And of course, we can't get everything. So we depend on all of you that's listening on this call right now to make sure that you're reporting, good information and getting your neighbors and friends and family members to the right websites that have the laws about how this works, the processes, and on how this important process works. So I think those are the things that keep me up at night, is that we miss something, and that it leads to true distrust. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask questions and make sure the processes stay strong and stay in a form that we can trust. But it's amazing what we have. As I mentioned at the beginning, the U.S. elections, they're decentralized, and almost 10,000 state and local election offices are responsible for this. So it's not one centralized place. That's a strength of it too, because you have all of these individuals involved in all these different agencies and organizations, and it works remarkably well. There have been some examples of voting fraud in the past, but it's so tiny compared to the rest of the legitimate votes that come in. So I'm hoping that we can do our best in collaboration with other agencies and other groups working on the misinformation aspect. But it's so darn important for our democracies, no matter where you lie on the political spectrum.
And how can people we've heard we have information, I'm going to repeat this about the Secretary of State, but Jevin, how can people learn more about your organization, the Center for Informed Public?
Yes, so if they want to learn about our post, for example, about ballot harvesting, ballot collection, these kind of things, we have lots of these, but that's just an example. You can go to CIP, so it's the letter CIP.uw.edu, and you'll find those posts there. You can also reach out to us anytime if you have questions about misinformation. We have hired a communication director that handles that, and they can send them to me or some of my colleagues depending on the question. Feel free to reach out anytime, but we do have resources there. And then also we'll be running this real-time monitoring or observation system we call the Election Integrity Partnership. Again, this nonpartisan group It's called. You can find that also at the website. We'll be running that throughout the election and throughout any of these major events and other elections in the future. That is, as much as we can help on it, we will be doing that.
That's great. Dr. Jevin West, University of Washington Information School, thank you so much for participating. Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. And you can reach him by calling. You can reach him personally. Now, his office's number is 1-800-448-4881. Is that the right number? Yes. 1-800-448-4881 is Secretary of State's information line, or votewad.gov. And I want to thank everyone who's been on the call. We had thousands of people interested in this today, so it is a very hot topic. We apologize if we were not able to answer your question. You can find valuable information about the upcoming August 2nd primary election at our website, www.aarp.org/wallvotes. And we hope that today's call was helpful to everybody. I know I learned some things. I always learn something new from Jevin, and it's really great to meet you, Steve, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing to keep our elections safe and honest. Thank you all, and have a great day. This concludes our call.
Thank you.